Pat, there's nostalgia like nostalgia, and you don't get much more nostalgic than 100 years ago.
Welcome to
We
2024.
we're talking about a movie from 1924.
Yes.
It's Dante's Inferno, directed by Henry Otto. Now, you had the idea of coming into this year and looking at like big anniversary kind of years, not necessarily
Yeah,
the biggest films from those years, but just looking at a
right.
film from these, these kind of decade milestones and just kind of seeing where we are and where we've come from. And you sent me a list of like, here are a bunch of movies from 24, and I immediately keyed in on Dante's Inferno because I'm fascinated by that book. I love the illustrations. I love
Interesting.
the ideas behind it. And so I like,
Yeah.
okay, what would a silent movie, how would they handle that, 100 years ago? And the answer is quite well. First of all,
Yeah.
Pat, how you doing? And second of all, had you seen this movie before? Or is this your first time?
I had not. And that's what and in this anniversary pursuit, I think it is very interesting to look at films that we both haven't seen because that makes it not and since I'm so old, there's some other things I've seen so long ago that I can't remember. So yes, I'm doing fine, thank you, and good. This is a good one to kick off on, I think, the 24 series that we're doing because I knew of Dante's Inferno as the poem as a cultural thing. Doing research into it was astounding. I had no idea of its depth and breadth. The Nine Rings of Hell, the illustrations from the 1800s that a lot of this film is based on. Uh, just an incredible wealth of information about the background to this film, the previous 1911 Italian film, et cetera, and the several titles that are out there since then. So, a great basis for the first one.
Yeah, and watching it, it's crazy how much influence this film, I mean, the story for sure, but the movie had over, successive iterations, not only adaptations of Dante's Inferno, but also movies like, It's a Wonderful Life, the
Yes,
various iterations of A Christmas Carol. This was sort of an infusion of A Christmas Carol with Dante's Inferno to
right.
take a book that it was very old, very well renowned, but not just have a straight adaptation, but to incorporate elements of it into sort of a modern day for the 20s morality tale. I think it works very well. And it's one of those things where if it weren't a silent film, I mean, I don't know if you could release a silent film today and have it do anything. The closest we had was The Artist from 13 years ago, and
Right.
people still mock that movie, even though I happen to love it. But
I
it
do too.
is, it's beautifully done. It's stunning as far as what they were able to achieve in terms of the sets or the paintings and the depictions of hell. They are genuinely nightmarish and make you never want to visit the place. But also the absolute meltdown of our his name's Mr. Judd, but he's our Mr. Potter character from It's a Wonderful Life. The guy who's so stingy and rich and he owns the whole town. He doesn't care if he's, he runs slums.
Right.
He hates his family, they hate him, and his descent into madness is so complete that, spoiler alert, they do that classic thing of like, oh, it was only a dream and these are only visions of what could happen if you don't turn your life around. It is pulled off well here, but I was
Right.
genuinely kind of bummed in that last minute. I'm like, this is amazing. Like this guy, he's just getting it. He's getting the full damnation deal.
Yeah.
But we're getting way far ahead of ourselves. What was your impression of this film?
Well, one thing I want to say about that last scene, since you spoiled it, is that I thought it was very funny that they thought he was dead and then he pops up.
Well,
Because they
the
discover
thing is,
him and his head's on the desk and then suddenly he pops up, "Oh, I'm reformed. I'm dancing."
but
So,
it's
before I give an analysis of the film, there are 3 things I observe about the silent film era. And,
okay.
number 1, it's impossible to be an expert on it because there were so many movies made, so many Wild West things going on. Besides the major studios, which really didn't form until about 1918, we've got ancillary studios and people with cameras and blah, 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 down the line. It's nearly impossible. like, you look at the some of the credits in this film, or and you look at the individual actors, and they have 450 parts in their career because they did so many shorts and, stuff. So the second thing is the acting style is always so melodramatic. No matter what the subject of the film is, it makes you laugh. Because, the faces and the grinding, it just, at least I laugh.
See, I think it's because I've been getting more immersed in these older movies, especially lately. Because on Mark Krawczyk's Spoiler Room podcast, he's been doing a focus this year on pre-code films. So we're looking at a lot of
Right.
old, like, black and white movies. And so
Nice.
I've kind of gotten used to that visual language. It doesn't strike me as funny anymore. It just strikes me as these people being really into the drama of what they're selling, and I think it is impactful. Like I said, the main actor, Mr. Judd Senior, what was his name? I wanna yeah,
Yeah,
Mortimer
the
Judd, played
cast,
by Ralph Lewis.
Ralph
Towards
Lewis.
the end of this movie, he is just so frustrated and desperate, scared and angry all at the same time that I couldn't feel bad for him, but I really empathy is not the right word. I just felt like I was in his skin being dragged away by demons.
Well, just to talk about the language of the actor, uh, you know, the transition from stage to screen acting was was difficult for a lot of people. But also, I think that a lot of these early directors didn't kind of like, well, I'm used to the stage and the expressions I see on the stage. So that's how we're going to do the film acting. But the language of that acting style didn't really, I don't think, coalesce until probably the 1930s when your Jimmy Stewart's, your Spencer Tracy's, and those guys who had been in the theater create a whole new kind of film acting, radicalism, if you will, especially Spencer Tracy.
Well, it's
But
also, I think, because by then you had the advent of the talkies. I mean, we're talking about an era
sure,
in Dante's Inferno,
yes,
we still have
that
title
was
cards.
big.
So you can't do nuance. If you want to yell something at somebody, you have to, "Nah," and then the title card comes up and it's got an exclamation point at the end of it. So it's
Really good.
fascinating to me.
What I find extraordinary about whenever I see a silent film, and in particular this one, um, I like to look at the cast to see if there is anything that is connected to me as far as what I've seen in life, right? I consider myself a fairly good film historian. I can mingle with the best of them, but I looked at this entire cast. First of all, there wasn't one cast member I knew, and and that was to the point of they had 450 roles. But I looked at up the blackface guy. It was Bud Jameson. He did a lot of parts in Three Stooges films as the heavy.
Hmm.
So I've seen it, but I don't know specific, you know, Three Stooges. And then finally, Noble Johnson, who played the devil with the lash, was also in King Kong and Intolerance, both of which I have seen, and had big parts in each of them, and probably I could pick him up. But those are the three things about silent era films. And I use the term silent era because they are movies. They're not silent movies. They're movies, but they happen to have the era where they didn't have sync tracks and dialogue. So
Right,
I
and
learned that from Michael Kutzka.
there you go.
Yeah, the,
Um,
the old founder of the Chicago International Film Festival.
right. Well, as far as the way that we watched this movie, and I'll have a link to it
Mhm.
down below because it's,
Yeah.
I would love to have a physical media release for this. I don't know if it exists, but someone did a restoration on YouTube where they cleaned it up. They actually added some their own score to it. I listened to about 10 seconds of it. I'm like, I'll watch it as a silent film. No offense to the person who put it together.
Ah,
It's just not my taste.
I didn't mind
Um,
it. I thought it was pretty cool. He put
I
sound effects in it too.
Yeah, I don't need that. The experience of watching it completely silent, I mean, it would have been interesting to have an orchestral accompaniment like at the Music Box
Right.
with whatever the original, score was, but I found myself really concentrating on the visuals minus,
Ah,
worrying about dialogue or sound effects or anything like that. Um, there is a slightly longer version that's also on YouTube, but it hasn't been touched up at all. It's so muddy that you can't
right.
there's like title you can't read the title cards, you can barely see what's going on. This is a much cleaner
Yeah,
version. It's not perfect,
yeah.
but from what I understand, the uncut version that I looked at had more hell scenes in it, but honestly, at 49 minutes, I think this movie is perfectly timed out. We get just enough of everything that we don't overstay our welcome at all.
Well, I did some research into the film itself, and, apparently, up to this point, there's not a super complete version of it. There is theories that it's like 91 minutes long, but what happened was, of course, with the nudity in it, you know,
Mhm.
and I didn't really notice it because of the scenes being so, you know, the scenes were so mise en scène. You're looking at every aspect and every corner of the frame because it's so wild. I didn't really notice the nudity until I did some research afterwards. Now, I was thinking in the days pre-porn and pre-Playboy, did the salacious men go around and say, "Dude, you can see some nude. I swear, it's Dante's Inferno. Go to the flickers." But no, it because of the nudity in it, it was sliced and diced in, like, I guess, every single, film society in the country, and coupled with the fact it was on nitrate stock, they lost a lot of the film. Now, the aspect is there's 2 reels missing, so that's I just wanted to mention that.
No, it's weird because I did, like, looked up on Wikipedia and I saw that thing about the nudity too, and I guess in this version, you can see we see Cleopatra in hell, which is a
Right.
very interesting segment. She's sort
That's
of
very, very, very
hasn't
interesting.
she almost hasn't realized that she doesn't have adoring minions everywhere, so she's kind of, like, bowing to this crowd, and she looks like she's naked, except she's got this, long hair that's covering up certain parts of it.
Right, right.
But again, you can kind of make out naked bodies here and there, but I put it on the
Yeah.
same category as, like, Schindler's List. I remember back in the
Oh,
late
sure.
'90s when they
God,
played
yes.
that on TV, right? They played Schindler's List on TV, and there are actually people, like, upset because, "You can't show that movie uncut, there's nudity in it." I'm like, "Yes, there are people being marched into the ovens. It's not titillating, you know?
No,
Who's this supposed
no.
to arouse?" Um, but,
I don't know,
yeah,
something
so
about
I think
hell
it's right. I mean, there's nothing sexy about hell. I'm gonna put that on a T-shirt. Um
Dante's Inferno, 1924. Uh,
But I will say there is the story of our Mr. Judd, who's our curmudgeonly, millionaire. He's cruel to everybody, and he's got this business associate named Mr. Craig, and he is about to be, I guess, voted out or kicked off of some board or something and ruined.
very weird.
And he's asking Judd for his help on a vote, and Judd says, essentially no. And so Craig gets a copy of Dante's Inferno and scrawls this curse across it, basically saying,
Wow.
essentially, I hope you end up here and burn in hell. And what's great is that he does that on the Leaf page, featuring one of my favorite artists, Gustave Doré, who here's a book of his Bible illustrations,
Wow.
very
I'll be
influential
damned.
in my own work.
So cool. Was that
But
in
yeah,
the
no one
is that those are the illustrations from the 1800s?
This I'm not probably. I mean, he was the artist that
That was a
illustrated the
modern
version of
edition.
Dante's Inferno that they were referencing in the movie. So yes, probably. I haven't looked at
Yeah.
my copy of Dante's Inferno in a long time, but it's very possible. Um,
Again, I
but
read
what
this
I
on Wikipedia, so
right.
go ahead.
I recommend reading Dante's Inferno in its fullest if you get a chance, especially if you get a version that has the context, like annotations, because it'll talk about
Right.
certain people they encounter, like, oh, this was a world famous politician and he's being like roasted like a pig on a spit, kind of a kind of a thing. But yeah, it's all very interesting. And when we see these visions of hell that are brought on primarily by it starts off with Judd reading Dante's Inferno, because he gets this graffitied book, but he's like, "What's this all about?" He starts reading about Dante and Virgil, who is a spirit who's called forth to guide Dante through the 9 descending levels of hell. Eventually, he gets so wrapped up in his own mania that an actual demon visits him and it hangs out in his office and is taunting him and helps
Yeah, that's right.
push Judd towards his own damnation. And that's when the movie gets really, really wild. The further down Dante
Right.
and Virgil go, the further Judd descends into madness. And yeah, just the visuals alone are enough. I think anybody could watch this and be completely freaked out.
Well, especially it's a 49-minute movie. We have time. So, but
Yes.
one of the things that really struck me about the whole design of it was the sophistication of it. That,
Hmm.
a lot of people think of the silent era films as unsophisticated or not worth watching because we're too wrapped up in our modern sensibilities. But this stands up to any kind of production design that you see today. You just have to like
Yes.
sit back and say, okay, it's 1924. But because it's radical, it's extreme. It's a vision of hell that is appropriate to what hell should be, I guess. And, and Virgil, in fact, is a ancient Roman poet. So that was in the original poem, correct? That he
Hmm.
Virgil's the one that guides Dante, who is a re- representative of the author of the book. Dante refers to the guy writing the poem, and
Right.
he's taken through hell. The 9 circles of hell, that's where it comes from, folks. Uh, again, I haven't read the piece, but doing the background, I'm like, oh my God, this is one of the basis for all of our mythos, you know. So yeah, so that's pretty much the story. And it's told in a very compact 50-minute form. And it's the separation into separate stories as they do. It's like chapters, right? We go
Hmm.
from 1 to 5. And are these chapters, do they reconcile with the original poem itself? That's my question.
No, I
Mm,
mean well, because the original poem didn't have any of that modern stuff about like a businessman and all
sure.
that. It was literally just Dante going into hell with Virgil. Um,
Right.
and there's also a lot missing. For example, we never get to see the ninth circle of hell, which is where we see Satan. When I read that when I was younger, my mind was completely blown because what do you think of Satan? You think of a guy burning for eternity. No, the further you go down into hell, the colder it gets. So that ninth
Ah,
circle is he's encased in ice. And it's just
great.
everything is very I can't remember who is down there with him, but there are certain because every circle represents a different level of sin or different degree of sinner. You've got deceivers, you've got murderers, adulterers, and all that stuff. But there are people I think that might be like, it's reserved for the worst of the worst. I think, like, Judas is down there, the famous betrayers and, like, the big marquee bad guys, leading up to when the book was written. Um,
I can
but
think of a few people that could be down there now.
a few, but, but the thing is, like, in terms of the representations of it, it is kind of hard to see because it's an older work, and the guy who did the restoration did the best he could. I think
Yeah,
if this were to be in high definition, you might lose some of that magic because, as you're saying, people have a vision of what old movies are like. When we
right,
see Dante and Virgil first cross from the kind of the wooded area before you get into hell, and they go through that famous arch that says, "Abandon hope, all ye who enter here." On the other side of that, you see like these crazy alien mountains and cliffs and everything, this big dark sky. It's a clearly a painting, but then you see them walking through it. The scale is just perfect down at the very bottom of the screen. But because it's all sort of fuzzy, you don't get that, oh, this is separation where they insert
right,
a plate or these are the actors. It all looks like they're actually there.
it's true.
There's a scene where they run into, again, I can't remember which sin it is, but there's people who are, I think it's people who loved money. They are
right,
eternally fighting other over these giant boulders of gold, which in hell
right.
mean absolutely nothing like they do on Earth. And then to further
It's
twist the
true.
blade, they're wrestling with each other. And then Virgil and Dante go up kind of over a ridge. And that's when a giant storm, like a torrential downpour of molten lava, covers them as they're fighting over the gold. You're like, this is
Yeah.
amazing.
Well, I have to ask you another art direction, question in it. The radio the guy was looking at, to me, was a precursor for television. Now, was this his fantasy that these singers were singing on this little kind of cathode tube, or is it this guy, predicted television? Because television was being invented about that time. You know, I can't think of the name of the inventors, but they were coming up with the lines on the screen to create the image, et cetera, et cetera. This guy had a TV going. What do you think? Was it a
I
fantasy of the guy who was listening to the radio and they just perpetuated it, or was it an actual? He was so rich he had one of the early TVs. What do you think? They
you
were
know,
very rich.
they were. It almost feels like a Star Trek kind of situation where they've
Yeah,
got the communicators in the '60s, and now we have cell phones. But
right,
the
right,
way I the way I looked at it was, it's not very cinematic first, it's a silent film, so you can't really show someone listening to different kinds of music on the radio. And so the
right.
way I read it was
Good
he's
point.
almost switching channels on this giant like gramophone radio because we see different types of
Right.
performers. So that's the way I read it. He's not actually seeing them. That's for our benefit.
That's awesome. Um, let's see. Should we get into the other
Let's get into it.
subject
I
I
know you
want
want
to
to
do?
talk about it.
All
Yep.
right. This is Black History Month, of course,
Sure you want to do this?
and because it's Black History Month, I glaringly noticed that one of the actors was in blackface. Turned out he was a
Hmm.
comedian. I mentioned him earlier, Bud Jameson, who was the heavy in a lot of Three Stooges shorts later. But this guy, this was so obvious blackface, blah blah blah. But the point is, and we've talked about your heritage before. Um, the, your father was a African American man, a, a black guy, right? I mean,
Yeah.
obviously a black guy. Now, on a scale of 1 to 10, what was your intimacy level with him as far as conversation was concerned?
I'm glad you put that last bit on it because I was not at all intimate with my father.
Right. That's
But
why that's a key to this question. No, no, I mean, I don't mean to dredge up your sordid past,
oh
but
no, I was making a terrible joke about a different kind of intimacy, Pat.
oh, for
Um,
God's sake, you're breaking the mood. You're breaking my
well,
blackface mood. Go ahead. I'm just
that's the second T-shirt to come out of this show. Um,
very good.
but no, so as a tribute to my father, he is the reason that I tell these kinds of jokes at these inappropriate times. So,
Oh, okay.
hail
I
dad.
get it. I get it. My
You know,
question to you is, did he ever talk about his attitudes for things like blackface? And there's 100 other questions and answers and everything else. I mean, you were fairly young when he passed, correct?
no, I mean I was in my late 20s.
Well, that's
But we
that's
had an
still
estranged
young.
we had an oh my gosh. Pat, you're right. Um, damn you.
What?
'Cause
What?
when I think about pretty young, my idea of pretty young is like, oh, I was, 10 or 17, but yeah, I was in my late 20s and now I'm in my late 40s.
Hey,
Now
dude,
I'm gonna
I'm
cry.
60 freaking 3 years old. A 20-year-old is like a freaking teenager to me now. So what can I
And
say?
me too. No, I get it.
Well,
Um,
yeah.
no, it's strange. We may have talked around like some similar issues before, but he was very much a Cosby era kid of the
Right,
'60s,
right,
revolutionary,
right.
in terms of like, let's fight for equal rights, for civil rights, and hey, we've got our
Sure,
successes. Let's see what we can do with it. So he didn't. We didn't talk much about blackface in particular, although I do for Mark's show that I mentioned before, talking about pre-code movies, we did watch a Charlie Chan film, and my dad was a big fan of Charlie Chan movies, but we never watched it
right.
in the sense of like, hey, this is a white guy, a Swedish guy playing an
Yeah,
Asian, and we shouldn't watch these
right,
movies. Like, no, I love Charlie
right,
Chan,
right,
and he loved like Putney Swope. He liked blaxploitation. So we just kind of, and he loved the Cosby Show. I was talking to my wife recently about how much of the television that I watched in the 1980s growing up, I was kind of a latchkey kid, was black TV. What's happening, give me a break, different strokes, that kind of stuff.
right,
And how,
right.
because we keep talking about identity and how people need to be seen in their entertainment in order to feel validated. I'm like, I grew up, I had a black dad, but it was never really an issue. But I never had trouble relating to black characters, even though I was not, clearly one. And I grew up in a mostly white kind of environment, if you want to call it that. So it is a very, I don't know what he would think of the 2020s. I think he'd spend too much time throwing up to comment on it. But in terms of
Well,
blackface, we never really got into it as a problem
right.
or even like a historical artifact.
No, because I mean, it wasn't a conversation in that era either. We're talking 25 years ago, but one of the reasons I brought that up was to just talk about it in general. If you were to describe your father from a scale of Martin Luther King to like Malcolm X, where did he fall in that spectrum, do you think? If
Jeez.
X is a radical, segregationist who thought the white man was the devil, to King, who was a man of peace, who wanted to, you know, although each of them had the other aspect within them.
And I
Makes
think
them
that's I
fascinating.
think that's what makes it a tough question because you kind of
Yeah,
meet in
well,
the
yeah,
middle, and I think
right, yeah, right.
I
I
think you
don't
meet in the
again,
middle
I
and you
don't mean to characterize your dad, so
no,
anyway,
it's an interesting question. I haven't thought of it on this scale, but I think if you meet in the middle, that's kind of where you find him because
okay,
he's
okay,
I think that in terms of civil rights, he would very much have been of a Malcolm X, Black Panther kind of mentality in the '60s when he was young and kind of coming up, but then
sure.
sort of realizing that MLK ideal through what you might call the Cosby era. Now, I know a lot of younger people are watching this saying, hearing me invoke Bill Cosby, and like, "Oh, that horrible rapist." I'm like,
He's
"Yes,
canceled.
but also a very important cultural figure of his time."
But
So it's you
that's
can't
why that
discount that.
documentary on him is a must-see because, again, like OJ in Black and White, we took a man who was one of the most famous in his profession and saw his downfall from there. But just to get back to blackface, so now we've done all the preliminary stuff.
Yes,
I
yes.
really want to talk. I want to talk about it historically,
Mhm.
um, because it came out of vaudeville. In fact, the vaudevillian Jim Crow, which the nature of post or 20th century post slavery discrimination was called, was also a blackface performer. Blacks would put blackface on their
It was
skin as
Cork,
well.
yeah, mhm, yeah.
Right, right. So that's the origin of it. It started in show business. It went to minstrel shows, very popular in vaudeville. Everybody did it. And then, of course, when the film industry started, since a lot of these players are from vaudeville, I'm sure Bud Jamison had done blackface on stage, so it wasn't a big deal for him to do it in a picture back then. And but should it be eradicated or can it be shown without context? I think those are the two questions. Um, should it be canceled altogether? Should every film that has been made before with blackface be canceled? Now, I think no, but if somebody is seeing this who's a person of color without a historical context and they're seeing this, is that as bad as canceling? What a moral
Um,
question. I don't know why I came up with it.
no, it's a good one, but it's an answer that it's a quick answer for me because I
Right.
mean, here's no, I do not believe in canceling art. I mean, there was a story a couple weeks ago about they put a sensitivity disclaimer on HBO Max in front of Blazing Saddles. I'm like, that is a goddamn crime. Okay, if you're
Well,
gonna
they
watch,
can still
if you're
show it.
gonna
It's a little context. It's like you're gonna hear the N word in this. If you're sensitive to the N word, don't watch it. I mean,
if you're
that's
sensitive to
that's just
no, if you're sensitive to the N word, just don't leave the house and stay off the internet. Okay, this is look
some
up
people are
until
sensitive to the N word. I mean,
yes, and some people need to be hooked up to machines in order to survive. Uh, honestly, because we have to
it's
be
all
adults.
anecdotal.
No, we
Well, I
have
mean,
to be adults.
fine.
Look, when I watched Blazing Saddles for the first time when I was 8 years old, my parents loved that movie. My white mom, my black dad. They never said, "Oh, well, you gotta watch out because, the historical context of this means you're gonna hear some sensitive language." No, they just laughed along. They said, now, don't say this part at school, but it's funny, right? So I think honestly, if
Well,
you're going to be
it
triggered by something, that implies to me that you have no other cultural context for anything. And I just can't, we cannot bring the rest of society down to coddle that level of inexperience, stupidity. I'll say it,
can I make a counterpoint to that?
please.
And that um, I grew up in the 1970s, right? So I know it from being on the ground now as a youngster, but still I was on the ground. And I did know of the racial uh, stuff swirling around. King was not a contemporary, but he was certainly influential still. And we were
Yeah.
still like, that's this side of town, and that's this side of town. The point being is that it it simply was not a social the social atmospheres are different in every era. We're in a different social atmosphere. We have people out there now, young, old, middle age, whatever, that are sensitive to some things because of the struggle they got to where they're at and their position in life. They don't want to turn on the TV and see the N word slocked around after they spent all their career trying to establish themselves in whatever field or whatever aspects they are. And we're in a social situation where people have finally gotten sensitive to that. Now, triggering, that's a whole different topic. I don't. I have. You're raising kids. I didn't raise kids. I know that there's a lot of sensitivity and a lot of problematics involved with those sensitivities in schools. But who are we to say what is supreme and what isn't, as far as pigmentation is concerned in this day and
I'm I'm
age?
I'm
So
I'm the one who's gonna say it, Pat. I'm gonna make the judgment. It's a judgment call, and I'm making it, as Bill Hicks once said. This stuff, we are going backwards. This is not progress. Okay, the people who are overly sensitive to this stuff, and I will say it, and you can come at me, but
no,
they
I'm not
need to
coming at
get. No, I'm talking about the folks who've watched this far, both of you. Um, the
you. How you doing, folks or
hey,
folk?
folk, yes, you, Billy, in the back. No, the okay, is let's just take a look at a movie like Blazing Saddles. Yes, the N-word is all over it, but it is not Pulp Fiction. Now, Pulp Fiction has the N-word all over it, as does most of Tarantino's oeuvre. If there were to be a case for some kind of a sensitivity label, I would say apply it to Pulp Fiction, not to Blazing Saddles, a film. The very point of that movie is to bring up the racial issues of the day, satirize
Sure.
them, and come up with an actual narrative point. The narrative point of the film is people of different races coming together and realizing each other's humanity. Now, if you turn on Blazing Saddles and you hear the N-word in the first 10 minutes and then you turn it off, you completely miss out on everything else. And I'm sorry, I do
Okay.
not care about your opinion or your sensitivities at that point. Now, if you watch Blazing Saddles and you're still upset that you heard the N-word a bunch of time, again, I don't care about your sensitivities or your problems. I cannot account for you when we are trying to move forward. There are going to be people that get left behind. And honestly, I don't know who these fictitious people are that can't hear the N word or other racial slurs, who probably also consume other kinds of media in which the N word is conveyed in a completely different context. I'm talking about hip hop, rap, movies that are targeted at maybe the black demographic, in which it gets thrown around so casually. It's like, oh, I can only hear that word if it's coming from certain people. That is also a problem. Now, I'm not advocating for
Well,
people to go around liberally using it. I'm talking about in the context of art, grow up a bit.
I don't think they're equal, though. We're talking about points of view. Rap and hip hop were both taking the word back to the people who had been oppressed by it. Now, that's a very curt little definition,
It's
but
it's also a
it's something
controversial one within the so-called black community. There are people who
I
say,
real I
"Yes,
realize that.
I
I
get
realize
that, but it's still wrong
that.
to use it, so you should stop."
But I don't think they're equal when somebody from the white world is going to apply it to his or her art. Now, I agree with you about Mel Brooks and the satire within Blazing Saddles, but that's a nuanced, contextual, I've seen it 30 times sort of thing. I have no problem with somebody. Okay, I'm going to give you an anecdote. Person is studying hard. They're sick of the atmosphere of being black, that they have to explain themselves, and they don't want to hear the N word. They don't even like it in hip hop. Okay. So they sit down to watch Blazing Saddles for the first time. Maybe they're a film student, maybe they're not. But they sit down the first time, and you're going to hear this kind of stuff in there. So at least it prepares that person who is sensitive that this is going to occur. I don't have any problem with that. I think because
But
there's a
here's the
different
thing. Here,
social
how do you?
environment.
But how do you? Honestly, I understand what you're saying. I still think it's a bullshit construct, because how do you
Oh,
prepare
thank you.
yourself? You're gonna. Okay, we have to imagine this scenario. Let's talk this through. I'm going to sit down
Right.
and watch Blazing Saddles. Do I
For
ask
the first
what
time.
is Blazing Saddles? Right? Do I do any kind of research to say, oh, this is a 1964 Mel Brooks movie about race?
Let me
Now, the further question is, it's from 1964 and it's about race. Does
74.
that
Let me
imply
It's from the
culturally that there
70s.
might be controversial stuff in there? The other thing is, if they
Mhm.
see this title card come up beforehand and say there may be problematic material can mean anything. Unless they explicitly say you're going to see the N word, not even spell it out, but just like the N word, would that does that prepare them? Do they steel themselves like, okay, I'm finally ready to sit down and watch this comedy. I'm ready. I know it's coming for me. Or do they say,
I
I
think
can't deal with that. I'm not going to watch this movie. Either way,
I
again,
just
I
wanna
don't
go
have
back
time
to
for
the
that.
different social environment. I just wanna go back, and I'll tell you another thing, people don't study history. People don't know
And that is
context.
not that is their responsibility, Pat. We cannot move forward by
But what
saying
about
we are
our
going to
what
cater
about
to
the
the what?
What about the industry's responsibility to create context? Are they should art
None.
go out there with absolutely none? You know, okay, well that's fine. That's the bottom line for you. I get it. I get it. I'm I'm just thinking of a kinder nation that that a
I don't
society
think
that
it's
is
kind.
evolving.
I don't think it's kind to infantilize people to the point where we are saying we don't think you are emotionally mature enough to handle this and discover the context for yourself.
Okay, I don't see it as
You're right.
making babies out of people.
I think the better word to use than infantilize is racist, because no one is sitting there saying, "Oh, this movie from a long time ago that deals with Irish slavery or Italian discrimination. There's stuff in there that might trigger some viewers, so we're going to have a disclaimer in front of that." No, I think it's only being applied to certain categories of people, and I have a problem with that, and I think my father would have too.
No, I get it. I get it, and that's fine. And I get. I think the bottom line, and it's for a lot of people too, not just you, is that art should go out without context and let the bearer of the or the audience of the art take the bearing of of what a person does. There is some offensive stuff out there, and there will continue to be offensive stuff that breaks the barriers of what the thought process is. Again, I'm just going on the context of a different kind of social uh, atmosphere that we have right now, and we try to be accommodating a lot of times, and then we step on our own feet. Uh, but I do believe some of these disclaimers are, again, trying to be more accommodating, more kind, more expressive. Let's put something in context, et cetera, et cetera. Now, there are certain films that can't be shown anymore, like not, I mean, you can still show Holiday Inn. We go back to Holiday Inn because there is one very, very gross blackface scene. When I was a kid, they cut it out of the movie. They just cut, it goes from holiday and they totally skip over February. You maybe they show the Valentine. I haven't seen it in years. But anyway, that's always been a of all the Christmas films that come along every year, that one's always left out because of that sequence. Now, whether that's right or not, again, if you're a bottom liner and you say all art should be shown without context or disclaimer, I believe in that. But I also just think because of social atmosphere, we're trying to be a little more accommodating and kind, and that includes the arts. So
I think this is the beginning of a very slippery slope. I mean, we've already seen it, leading up in the last couple of decades. But I mean, you mentioned there are certain things, movies you can't even find anymore, like Song of the South. I think it starts with disclaimers, and then to make sure that there are no one's sensibilities who are ruffled or feathers ruffled. They say, well, we're just not going to show this movie anymore. We're going to lock it up in the Warner Archive, and if you've got a pirated version, that's great. If not,
you can still
then
see
we're just not going to do it. Look, they recut Home Alone 2 a few years ago because Donald Trump is in it for 10 seconds, and they took it out, and you cannot find that version anymore unless you have an old DVD or Blu-ray. The new version, the digital version, is not
I
going to
can
have
go
him in it
on
anymore.
YouTube and see Donald Trump in it. They have
Right.
it on YouTube. I
But
mean, it still exists.
what I'm saying is the official version of these things. Hey, everyone, you're watching Pat and I talk, and now you're watching me talk. I wanted to pop in here for a second and just set the record straight on something. We're talking about Donald Trump being omitted from Home Alone 2, and I was saying that it was a case of all the current and future home video releases and streaming and all that stuff. Turns out I was wrong. I was confusing that story with a story about The Simpsons excising an episode from season 3 featuring Michael Jackson, which, from what I understand, is not on Disney Plus, for example. And the physical home media landscape, the plan moving forward is that that episode will not be included there. There was a story a few years ago about Donald Trump being taken out of Home Alone 2. Turns out that was an edit from Canadian television, and I think that actually happened in 2014 or something like that. So it predated his presidency and even him running for president, all that business. I know there was, this is where it gets kind of confusing because Macaulay Culkin had signed on to a movement, an online sort of petition, or the idea of a petition of removing Donald Trump from the movie. And then there were memes about, well, who could we put in? And they inserted a whole bunch of like crazy cameos into that scene. So I just want to let you know I got it wrong on this one, but the principle I think still holds true. And an example of that is that Simpsons episode, which if you have the old school Simpsons DVD sets, you've got quite a collectible on your hands. I happen to have one. And the irony is not lost on me that I'm ranting about meddling with content, and here I am meddling with my own content. But just wanted to set the record straight. Figure this would be a little bit more interesting than a title card. Maybe you disagree. I don't know. But anyway, back to the video. Thanks for listening to my nonsense. Now, look, let's not even talk about YouTube. Let's talk about 25 years from now when people want to watch Home Alone or Home Alone 2. The next generation who have no idea that Donald Trump was even in that movie. They watch, they rent it, they buy it or whatever in the new holiday pack, and there's this 10
Do you
seconds is
think
missing.
maybe
Maybe they cut around it easily, but the point
what
is
if
it
the
doesn't matter if you like the guy or not. They are
right?
altering art for the sake of sensibilities that might not even exist in 20 or 25 years.
True. But the one that's a wild example to bring up. But what if the artists themselves say, I hate Trump. I don't want him in my movie anymore. Chris Columbus or whoever was it Chris Columbus who directed that? I
Yeah.
mean, is that a decision that can be made, and is that legitimate?
It is both
Because
a decision that can
I've realized I made a mistake 30 years later by putting this monster in my film. I don't want him in there anymore. He's gone.
that monster, it was Donald Trump in the 1990s. The guy was a
I'm
Democrat.
not, I didn't bring,
All
I
right.
didn't bring, I didn't, I don't use monster in the context of him, although I would. Uh, um, no, I just meant, it just excising something. This is monstrous to me, even though I made it in 1992 and it was fine at the time. What's your feeling on that? Can artists alter their works to censor themselves?
I mean, they can. I mean, George Lucas did it sort of in
Mhm,
reverse when he expanded for the Star Wars,
mhm,
special editions, and
mhm.
uniformly, universally, to this day, he's still mocked for doing that. Now, the problem
Right.
is, as I just mentioned, you can't find the original versions anymore, except for fan edits and unrestored versions people find on YouTube that no one is going to sit down and watch. They want to watch Star Wars. They're going to pull it up on Disney Plus. They are still tinkering with that movie, with the
I
original,
know.
with The New Hope. There was a cut from 2 years
I
ago
know.
that they made a couple of edits. So, yes, artists have the right to do whatever they want with their work. Studios have a right to make those decisions as long as they clear it with the lawyers and everything. But in terms of talking about it as being, art, at that point, it's just product. I don't agree with it. I don't like being lied to. If someone wants to say there are now two different cuts of the movie that we're going to put out, this is the Christopher Columbus I hate Trump cut, and here's the original version, then it's up for me to decide. But to archive these things, to make the official versions according to whatever sensibilities we're living through now. I mean, can you think about if they had this technology and this ability 50 years ago? Hey, we don't like black people. We're going to cut them out of our movie altogether. And then we're going to see a version of this film, 50 years from now. It's like, hey, has America always been a completely white nation? No, that'd
That
be
would
wrong.
certainly change Guess Who's Coming to Dinner.
Yeah, and the answer would probably be, "Oh, it's the milkman," and then it's a 5-minute short. And Sidney Poitier never had a career. But
Um,
this is
again,
we have strayed far
no,
afield from the
this is
1920.
this is good
Well, I mean,
though. It's
they were
good.
talking about
And
these things, I
we're
guess, in
at
the
50
20s, but
minutes
yeah.
too, so I guess we have to wrap it up. But just one last thing. I That's an interesting question about whether an artist has the right to excise his own work. I mean, uh, it I don't know. It depends on the power base. Like Lucas had the power to take out everything he didn't like about the first Star Wars. Hey, dude, I saw a trailer in '77 that made it look like a comedy, meaning that it was a satire of the old Buck Rogers thing. I seriously, and I remembered seeing that distinctly, but I can't find that anywhere. I can't find that trailer anywhere. I've
But
searched for it. I just
Pat, I thought
prove
you
I
said you
wasn't
can find
crazy.
anything. I thought you said you can find anything on
Well,
the
that's
internet.
it. I talked about his power, right? And he was the one that also said if I could find every copy of the holiday special, I'd break it with a hammer. So but he doesn't have enough power for that. That the cat got out of the bag. But he had enough to say when he was doing the trilogy to say, take out that trailer that made it look like a comedy. Okay.
Yeah.
I think
I
they were just throwing things against the wall at that time. That okay, here's the product. We don't understand it, but let's see what people will understand about it. And that's how that trailer came to be. Now I may be nuts because that was fucking 45 years. Excuse my language. 45 years ago, and I may be delusional. I may be just wanting to think that that happened because of the Star
no,
Wars
I
religion.
I've I vaguely remember hearing something about that before you brought it up, so I don't think you're delusional. But
Well, good.
this has been a fascinating conversation.
Happy Black History Month, everybody.
Yes. everyone who's sensitive is being oversensitive. Happy Black History
I
Month.
I
No,
love
I realize how terrible
I
this
love that
sounds,
you
but
have a strong opinion, and you do provide context for that strong opinion. And even though we have we only have a slight disagreement. Mine is coming from from a a societal atmosphere thing, which is a totally different thing because that doesn't that doesn't hold water sometimes. So I from your point of view, I totally understand where you're coming from, and let's take Donald Trump out of every movie.
except the movie they're eventually going to make about him. I heard that they were casting something already, but I feel like
Well, he's
that's a little
already
too
been
soon.
played by somebody in that Comer movie. So anyway, we can move
Hmm.
on. That'll be another subject. But this was interesting because it came from the blackface discussion, which was in the movie. So if you see Dante's Inferno, be prepared for that. I'll give you your sensitivity warning now.
Now, listen, I appreciate that, kind of. I will say, Pat, just to show you and the half a person who's still watching, that I am not a complete monster. At the end of the movie, my jaw did drop, because at the very end, when everything's fine and Mr. Judd has his Scrooge waking up on Christmas morning and he's going and petting the dog that he practically kicked, and he's making well with his son and his wife and all that stuff. We cut back to Mr. Craig and the butler and the doctor, and they're all talking to each other, and they have the butler saying something. He's got the full cork and the white lips, and then they cut to his title card. Wow, his title card was I'm not going to read it in that voice, but it was like, I's the only one here that knows what's going on or happening or
Yeah.
something like that. I'm like, they yeah,
And
it's
in that social
accurate.
atmosphere of that time, that was perfectly acceptable,
I know, but
which
I'm
we
like,
can't
wow.
understand because we don't live there.
Yeah. So
But
yes,
yeah,
it is cringe,
it's
as
been
they
a
say, but yeah.
great discussion, and I think it's a discussion that needs to be made all over the place because we do need to try to try to understand where our sensibilities lie.
Yeah, and I think everyone should watch Blazing Saddles, trigger warning or not, just because it is one of those. Not only it's a great satire, it's very funny, but it is one of the great bromances of history. Cleavon Little and Gene Wilder, their friendship, how it comes about, what they are willing to do for each other. When you see them riding off into the sunset at the end of that movie, and then getting off the horses and getting into limos, I get the warm fuzzies just thinking about that, and how I'm glad I watched that at 8 years old, because that informed the way that I thought about friendship and race in a lot of ways growing up, and that's why I'm so disappointed by, and I think my father would have been too, by this cultural attitude of division that we seem to have come into since the last, 10 plus years. It felt like we were
Well,
really on the precipice of something great, and then,
right.
a confluence of things happened.
Well, there's a lot of powerful people who spend a lot of money to keep us divided. So let's put that in context too.
Yeah.
Uh,
Should I
but
put that at
yeah,
the beginning of this
again,
episode? No.
let's have a little toast to both of our fathers because my old man loved Charlie Chan too. He did.
Does that make both of
He
our
would watch it
parents
every Saturday
weird
morning.
does that make both of our parents weirdly racist, or just normal for their times? I don't know.
Normal for their times, man. Again, social atmosphere. We have to think of the social atmosphere.
Yes. And I gotta think of the clock. Unfortunately, I gotta run, but
Time's a
Pat, it's
tyrant.
yes, we'll talk again in
Really,
another, couple months, because we're
couple
doing every
months.
other
Yeah,
month
yeah,
now, but,
yeah.
I can't wait for that one. It's been great catching up with you. I love you, man, and thanks
Oh,
for
yeah. It was
suggesting
so
this
good to
series.
see you at Blade Runner. And just some of that, man. That was a completely different movie. I didn't remember seeing that at all. So,
Oh,
but I loved
I'll
it.
just say
I
my
loved it.
My yeah, I did too. My wife hadn't seen it before, and we had some conversations about some of the stuff that happened in that movie. Wow.
Interesting.
Yeah. All right,
Well,
sir.
that's
Well,
for
thank
another
you everyone
episode.
out. Yeah. Well, folks out there, if you like this episode, please like, subscribe, ring the bell for notifications. Look up all of Pat's stuff down below. The information is there. And until next time, whenever that is, whatever that is, thank you and take care.